Welcome everyone, and in this tutorial we're going to be getting into some fun stuff with the Perform tab. We're going to be building out a VJ interface using some of the hot new features in the later builds. And we're also going to be rigging up some macros here in the IO tab and connecting it all together to drive a very simple and very boring square. So we're not doing anything fancy here because that would make this tutorial a lot longer, and I really want this tutorial to be focused on setting up the controls and setting up the IO tab. And there is a lot to cover there, so we'll save the interesting stage building and visual stuff for another video. All right, so we're going to start completely from scratch. We might end up with a slightly different result than what you see here, but we're going to have basically the same thing. We're going to check most of these boxes anyways. So to get started, just go to File, New, and create a blank new project. All right, the first thing we want to do is make a simple fixture, something that we can actually see and project content onto. We're going to just stick with the basics for now in this realm. So we'll just go to Create, Objects All, and then just make a fixture. We'll hop into Hull mode, and we'll make a single hull, and we'll just attach it to the origin here. And with that selected, we'll go up to the Viewport menu, Hull, Generator from Selection, and that's going to give us the default 10 by 10 grid. Not bad, but we want a few more pixels here to work with. So selecting our fixture in object mode, scroll down to, let's see here. Nope, sorry, that would be the generator. Grab the generator, and at the bottom there'll be a cutoff parameter that's default to 512. Set that to 4096, which is the max that value can be. And then for the X count and the Y count for our generator, just type in 64 and 64, and that gives us a nice big square, high density, lots of resolution, and lots of pixels, and we are good to go. One other thing I'm going to do, since we're not dealing with previs here, I'm going to make sure in our lighting section that our lighting is off for everything. So point lighting and volumetrics is off, so we're good to go. But just double check that because that will definitely affect your performance here. Okay, so we have a fixture. What's next? Generally, the next step in the process is to create a projector. We'll have multiple projectors by the end of this video, but we're going to start with just one, the primary projector. So if we go up to the Create tab once again, and do this with your fixture selected, it'll make your setup a little bit easier. Go to the Create tab, Objects All, and create a projector. If you do this with your fixture selected, it's going to actually map the projector onto it and kind of do a best fit, or just a fit operation technically. And depending on what kind of content you're using, you might want to change the ratio, aspect ratio of the projector's scale, but this is honestly fine for what we're doing here. So I'm going to move this back to kind of a little bit off of that fixture, and with our projector selected, let's just rename this to projector underscore RGB. Actually, no, I take that back. Let's go and rename this to projector shape. And you'll see why we're doing this here in a bit. So the goal here is to set up a VJ interface where we have a group over here of macros that controls the underlying shape. It's going to be a grayscale piece of content. And then on the right, we're going to have color presets, things that we can trigger that will colorize that monochromatic macro. Down here in the center, we're going to have our viz comp, which is basically a preview of our scene. And beneath that, we're going to have some cool color sliders that lets us actually dial in a specific color when we want it. So that's a lot of custom stuff, but it's all going to kind of come together and make sense by the end of this video. So we have this projector, and this is for our shape. And shape is the name that I'm calling our macros that are basically here to represent the grayscale base content, right? So to kind of get things moving, we should make just a quick, simple macro as our first shape macro. So let's go ahead and go into the IO tab, click on Create, then System Nodes and All, and make our first macro. Let's go ahead and name this macro to circular or something like that, and then with that selected, we can enter the macro, grab our default ramp 1 and click Edit. It's going to bring up our color ramp editor, and with this open, let's just click random grayscale ramp, and let's give ourselves something a little interesting here. Honestly, not too interesting because I want it to be identifiable as a circle ramp. So maybe this actually works out just fine. Let's just stick with this for now. So we've got a circular ramp, and if we want to, we can just go ahead and test our macro in the IO tab by clicking this play button down here. And it's going to start moving. And basically with macros, you have a timing parameter that's in the macros attribute. So if you go back up a level to the macro here and select it, over here you'll see that you have under config a unit for time and also a mode and a length. So this is probably fine for most things, but if you're doing a BPM show, we're going to set that up here a little bit later, we're actually going to want to have this set to beats, not frames or seconds. So let's go ahead and change that to beats, and we'll go ahead and set the length to 1. So the macro is going to loop on the beat, and of course the beat right now is set to the default, and we'll tweak that in a little bit here, but just know that that is basically reacting to the default BPM in GeoPix. So all right, we've got this macro circular, and it's just playing on its own. We're not actually triggering it from anything. It's just doing its own thing. So we're going to hop back in the editor and check it out here. So you'll notice that there is nothing on our fixture, and that's because, well, we have a projector, and our projector does work. You can see that it's causing our fixture to light up. There's nothing plugged into the projector. The way that GeoPix kind of operates between the IO tab and the editor is that you have your macros. You do whatever you want inside of your macro to assemble your content and set up the timing and et cetera, et cetera. But once you're done with your macro, you need to have a texture out node, which is by default you have 1, but you can make more if you have complex macros. We're not going to get into that in this tutorial, but just know that's something we'll cover down the line. But once you have your macro set up, all you have to do is drag the texture out node, which in our case we just have the 1, and you can see a preview of the texture. Just drag that onto our projector shape. And once you've done that, pretty much we can jump back into the editor, and you'll see that we have this playing out on our fixture, looking good. A couple things that we're going to tweak here just to make this all look a little bit more understandable. We covered this in an earlier tutorial, but we're going to kind of just dive in and do it really quickly. Is, you know, we want to tune this this lighting of this fixture to actually be less intense, because by default it's set to be you know, tuned to look more like a realistic light output of a pixel, which is going to be really bright. But what we actually want to see is more of the actual literal content, right? Which is going to be helpful for us when we're actually practicing and testing out our VJ. So if we grab our lighting object here in the outliner, we just need to scroll down here to image effects, and let's just turn off ambient occlusion, and let's go ahead and set the color gain for the pix to 1, and we can just set the surface to 1 as well. So this is going to give us a more one-to-one representation from what we see here in the IO tab and what's actually happening here. So this is maybe not as realistic in terms of your real-world light output, but it is going to help us see the content better. So, okay, the other problem that we have is this texture is warped, right? It's squished on X. The aspect ratio of this macro by default is, well, the macro is basically just taking on the aspect of the content inside, but the content inside is by default 1960 by 540, which is a 16:9 ratio. That's just like half of HD. So we're actually going to set this to something square, and I'll just do 512 and 512. And this is an important step to do, very important if you're going to be creating a lot of macros in GeoPix, because as you build out your macro library, each of these nodes consumes a certain amount of GPU memory, and depending on how big of GPU card, of a graphics card memory you have, you can have more or less of these. But once you pass that limit, you're going to start running into performance issues. And if you're doing it with LEDs, you really don't need that much resolution, right? In our case, we actually have a 64 by 64 grid. So in theory, we could take this down to 64 and 64, and you can actually see the pixels at that point. But we're not that hungry for performance in this tutorial. This is going to be just a demonstration, so I'll keep it at 512, 512. that keeps it pretty low, but it also keeps it high enough so that we could use this maybe a little bit more flexibly down the road if we add more pixels or change our setup or scale our projector. So it's good to sometimes plan for a little bit of flexibility there too. Okay, so we have a circular macro. It's in fact doing stuff, and that's good. So maybe now we should make a couple more macros just to have some variety, just to have a few numbers of things. So let's go ahead and take this circular macro. We'll hit Control D in the keyboard to duplicate it, and we'll rename this to macro radial. And we'll just change, at least keep this really simple. We'll change the actual ramp type to radial, which is going to give us a nice spinny thing here. And we can change the period to 0.5, gives us kind of like a windmill type of thing. Maybe 0.333 will give us kind of 3 points. And that's looking pretty good. So, all right, macro radial. Let's go ahead and make one more for now, and we'll call this macro blinders. No, let's call this macro bars. So we'll just take this and set it to a nice and boring horizontal ramp, and we'll just leave this at 1. And there you go. So we have macro bars, macro radial, macro circular. So at present, since we duplicated these, they're all playing because that's what happened to the first one. When we duplicated it, was already playing. So we need to select these and click stop, which is going to stop the macros and kind of pause them again. And when you do that, when you actually stop them, they stop showing up on your fixtures. The problem when we play all these is that they're all overlapping at once, right? They're all just kind of playing simultaneously. And what we really want is a system in the Perform tab that lets us switch between these as if it was a bank, like a radio button group. So doing this is quite straightforward. In GeoPix, make sure that you have the latest version of GeoPix from GitHub. You need to at least have version 15330 because these are really new features that have been implemented lately. But you know, if you're watching this after the date of this video and you've already updated, you probably already have the latest. So, all right, in the Perform tab, we have a blank canvas here, and we need to start making a few nodes or a few widgets. So go over here to the Create tab at the top, and let's start by adding a Viz widget. This will give us kind of a preview into our scene. And when we do that, we get a 2x2 little box here, and we can resize it. Let's just go ahead and make this reasonably medium-sized. And so, by the way, you can use Tab to jump between Edit and Perform mode, and that's very easy. I highly recommend doing it that way. So I'm going to make this a little bit wider so that we have symmetry here. It's looking good. So if you turn on the little eyeball here, you're going to actually see that we have a little window into our scene, right? This is the same exact camera and render as we have here. So whatever we do to set up our render here is going to translate over to our Perform tab. So I'm going to turn off the visibility on the projector shape. And I'm going to grab the fixture. Let's scroll down here to rendering, which gives us some toggles. And I'm going to turn off hull curves and pix curves. And we'll turn off the show icon. I'll take the generator here. We'll just turn that off as well, since we don't need to see it anymore. And this is looking pretty good. I'm going to do a few more things to kind of clean up our viewport here so we can get a nice clean preview. And so if we go to File Preferences and in the editor settings, let's just go ahead and start turning off some of these grid rendering elements. So that's looking pretty clean. If we just select our fixture, we see that it pulses green, goes away. So I'm liking that. Let's go with that. So if we go back here to the Perform tab, you'll see we've got a nice dark grid, no lights, just the grid and nothing else. So we're ready to move on with the next thing. So if we go back to the Edit mode in the Perform tab here and go to Create, let's go ahead and go to Generic Widgets, and let's make a macro a macro widget. So a macro widget is not actually a macro, it is a macro widget, which is something that you can link to a macro. So you can have multiple macro widgets that link to the same macro, and you can do a lot of other interesting things with macro widgets as well. But you know, for now, we're going to keep it pretty simple and just use them as a one-to-one trigger. So once you create these, you can size them up however you'd like. We're going to just leave it as a 1x1, And with it selected here in edit mode, we're going to go to this button on the right that says assign macro. And once you click this, it pulls up a list of all the macros that exist in your system. So we're just going to start by clicking on the macro circular, and then we'll go ahead and Control D to duplicate this, and we'll assign the macro radial to the second one, and we'll do this one more time, and we'll assign the macro bars to the third. So this is a very simple layout. We just got 3 macros, and when you update these via the menu, it's also going to update. What it basically does is it updates the macro name here, which you can edit manually if you'd like, and it also renames the macro widget to match that, right? So if you want to change the name of the widget here in the Perform tab, you can, but just know that the macro name is actually what links it to a specific macro in the IO tab. Okay, so let's hop back into Perform mode here, and let's just play with these buttons. So right off the bat, we do have functionality, and you can see that we have each of these buttons acting as a momentary button. So that's just the default configuration for these. If you go back to edit mode and click on one of these, you'll notice that you have 2 options here. You have button mode, which is set to momentary by default, and then you also have fade times. So before we get into the more advanced grouping stuff, let's just play around with this and see what we can do. So for the first one, I'll leave it all defaults. For macro radial, I'll set this to a toggle. And for macro bars, I'll set this to a fade time of 0.05 for the fade on, and we'll set this to a full second for the fade off. So with that done, let's jump back into Perform mode, and let's just see what happens when we play with these now. Macro circular does exactly what it did before. Macro radial is now a toggle, so I click it once, it's on. Click it again, it turns off. And macro bars, you know, it has a fast on but a slow off, so it takes a second to fade off. And that gives you the ability to, you know, take your macros and treat them differently from each other if you need to. Give them different on and off kind of parameters, so that's kind of nice. But what we actually want to do is create like a radio system, right? Because setting these manually is a bit tedious, and also if you have one that's set to toggle and the other one that's set to momentary, you get overlap, and that may not be necessary or desirable. So going back to edit mode, let's just go ahead and reset these things back to normal. The button mode doesn't matter as much because this will get overridden here in a moment, but the fade times is always going to be referenced from these parameters. So with these 3 macro widgets here, let's create a new widget called the Group Widget. So if you go up to the Create tab and go to Generic Widgets and click on Group, it gives you a new item called Group. So groups are basically grouping widgets. They do some pretty cool stuff, but they basically allow you to take several macro widgets and put them into a logical group. And so the way these groups work, over here on the right, you'll see that you have 2 parameters. You have a grouping function and you have a button mode. And this will probably look different if you're watching this video much later down the road, because groups will definitely have more functionality in the future. But at their core, they allow you to specify an override grouping function. Override button mode. And grouping function basically tells the group which macro widgets belong to my group. So in our case, we have our macro widgets beneath the group, right? They're actually physically beneath the group in the grid cells underneath group 1. So we actually want to choose group down from the grouping function menu. Now you might have a situation where you have your macros to the right of group 1. In that case, you'd want to just leave it as a default group right. It really depends on what you're doing and how you're laying out your system, but just know that you can group things down and to the right currently. So, okay, let's name our group. Let's go ahead and give it a name. We'll call it Group Shape. Maybe we can shorten this a little bit more, Shapes. And over here for button mode, we're going to leave this as exclusive. Exclusive is basically just radio buttons. And so if we hop back into the Perform mode now, we can click on these, and you'll see that as we click on one, the others get released. So this is quite nice. It's kind of doing what we need it to do. A couple other cool features of this is you can click on even the active one, and it will turn it off. So you have the ability to fully disable that bank. And you can also use the group stop button here, which is going to stop all the macros in that group. So this will allow you to kind of switch between these presets, and you can just basically add new macro widgets beneath this group widget, and they will automatically get added to that group. So very handy. Okay, so this is looking pretty good, and this is functioning. And we have our little preview here, and our performance is looking pretty good. So the next thing we want to do is get another set of macros that are going to give us, control over the color, because ultimately black and white is going to carry us only so far, and there's going to be situations where we want to multiply that with another color. So there's a few ways we can do that, two that we're going to cover in this tutorial, and we'll kind of combine them into one system. So if you think about Photoshop as a reference, if that's something you're familiar with, in Photoshop, think of this as your base layer, the thing that you have on the bottom. Now imagine creating another layer on top of that, and that would be just a straight color. Maybe it would be red, maybe it would be green, maybe it would also be white. And then you would set that to a multiply, and you would now have a colorized version of this shape in your main viewport. And so that's kind of what we're after here. That's what we're trying to accomplish, but we're going to be doing that through use of projectors. We're going to be talking about a feature that projectors have that haven't really been covered too much yet, and that is called their layer attribute. So if we grab our projector shape, and I'll just turn it back on here for a moment, I'm going to scroll down a little bit here, and we're going to be taking a look at the texture section. So this is where the constant color parameter exists. It's also where the gamma and gain adjustments exist. And more importantly, we have these two here, layer and blend mode. So these things will basically sort the projectors in the back end and cause them to kind of be processed in a certain order. So, if Photoshop is a good point of reference for you, then think of layer 1 as that bottom layer in your stack. Layer 2 would be one layer above that. Layer 3 would be above that, and so on and so forth. So what we're going to do here is we're going to duplicate this projector with Control D on the keyboard, and we'll just move this back so we can kind of see them, not overlap, and we'll name this to projector color. So now we've got a second projector called color. In the IO tab, you can see that we now have a second projector slot over here called color. Nothing's connected to it because this is a new projector. But back in the editor, we're going to take this projector and we're going to set its layer to 2. And we're going to set the blend mode to multiply. So that's going to give us the ability to, basically colorize that black and white monochromatic ramp with whatever colors that we deem. Now I'm just testing this with constant color, which is not really how it's going to be used, but that's just a good way to kind of test it out and see. So all right, with that done, let's hop back over into the IO tab and let's make a new column of macros here. So we'll go and duplicate macro circular. It's a good place to start. And we'll call this macro color 1. All right, so if we go inside that macro and grab the ramp and edit the ramp, we're going to use the random color ramp preset generator here, and we'll just kind of hammer away at this until we get something that kind of looks okay. There's a green and red color vibe, maybe blue and purple. Going for simple looks right now so you can really see the difference when we kind of fade between them, and that seems just fine. So let's actually call this blue purple, and I'm actually going to set this not to beats, but I'm going to set this to seconds so that it kind of just loops slowly and it doesn't do anything too crazy. And if we go back inside of here, I'm actually going to adjust this ramp very slightly, make it a little softer, and we'll set this to a, oh, it's already Hermite, so that's good. Okay, that's good. We'll go ahead and take this blue purple macro and we'll duplicate it. You'll notice that these are both connected to projector shape, and that's because we duplicated one of these shape macros which had its connections to that projector. So what we actually want to do here is just click on this connector stick and just drag it off and just put that somewhere on the graph, and that's going to disconnect them from everything. And we can go ahead and connect these to projector color. So here's the second duplicate. Let's just go ahead and edit this and do something interesting with this as well. That's pretty cool. We'll call this, I don't know, teal. Burnt teal, maybe. And we'll duplicate this once more. And we will just make a new preset. And we'll find something that looks good. Pink and green. There it is. So also, just to kind of add some more variety here, we'll go ahead and change this to a radial, and I kind of like that one being a circle. Let's change this one to just a left to right. So just to give ourselves some more variety. Of course, if you're doing things in a very clinical way, you might want to actually keep these all the same, so it's very consistent, but that's obviously up to you. So, all right, we've got these three, and they are all connected to projector color, and they're all playing. So we're going to go ahead and stop them from playing and hop back to our perform tab. And you'll notice that there's a small bug at the time of this video, and it won't be around for much longer. I'll get this solved, but if you make new macros, after you have some macro widgets, you're going to have some of them that get kind of rearranged, and they kind of get switched on you. So that's easy to just fix. Just go back in here and pick, one of the original macros that you had before, and that will get sorted out. All right, so I'm going to grab one of these macro widgets, duplicate it, move it over here, and let's just go ahead and assign the color stuff to these three macro widgets that I just created. And let's take our group over here, and we'll duplicate that as well, and we'll name this to colors. We'll leave it as group down and exclusive, and we'll hop back into perform mode. And now you'll see that we now have a nice little blend between our two banks. So let's go ahead and zoom in and hide our two projectors so we can really pay attention to what's going on here in the previs. So if we have nothing selected, we go back to having just a the underlying shape, right? And that works as you'd expect. And then over here, we can basically choose a color overlay to overlay on that, and that's quite nice. So this allows us to change these as independent layers or groups and have independent control of all of these. So very cool stuff, and this is already quite functional. You can have quite a large bank of color presets and quite a large bank of monochromatic things, and some of these can even be full-on video clips with color, and you can just eject the color layer when you need to. So this is just one style of VJing, and it's kind of an interesting one, so I thought I'd make a video on it. But we're not quite done yet. We're going to add some more cool features to this and make it a little bit more interesting. So all right, what's next? Well, the thing we want to do next is add another special color macro that we want to be able to enable at certain times. It's going to give us RGB slider control of those colors. So to do that, we're going to hop back to the IO tab, and we're going to duplicate one of these color macros, and I'll just call this color custom. And we'll just double click to go inside of that, and we're going to actually delete ramp 1, and we're going to go up to the create tab, and you can go to texture nodes. Let's see, utilities, maybe it would be under generative, and yeah, okay, so go to texture nodes, generative, constant. So constant is basically just you specifying a color. And of course, these come in with the default resolution of 960 by 540. So I'm going to reset this to 512, 512. And we'll just connect this to the texture out. So with that done, let's go and refresh our preview here and go back to the perform tab. You'll notice that we have to fix one of our macro widgets. That's no problem. We'll just go ahead and do that. And we'll duplicate this. I'm going to move this down here. And that's the cool thing about groups, is it doesn't matter where your widget macros are. They can be anywhere, but they just have to be within that group's bounds. So we're going to go ahead and choose the macro color custom. We'll go back to perform mode. So you'll notice that when we have this triggered, nothing interesting happens because we are multiplying white on white, so it doesn't change the color. But if we go in here and just set this constant one to maybe red, just to test things out, go back over here, you'll notice that it is in fact doing what we expected it to do. So The question is, how do we rig up sliders in the Perform tab to the color of the macro, the constant color that is being fed back into our fixture? So it's a bit of a 1, 2, 3 Perform IO editor kind of workflow, but once you see how this works, it will start making a lot more sense. So we need to make a few more widgets here in our canvas. So if we go back to edit mode and go up to create, generic widgets, we're going to use vertical sliders. So these are generic vertical sliders, meaning they don't have any express function built into them already. It's very much up to you to rig them up how you want and when you want. So let's go ahead and make one slider. I'm going to just put them underneath the preview here, and I'm going to duplicate that one until I get 3. You'll notice that we have the names renamed because they can't have the same name. We'll just call this V red, V green, and V blue. So we have a red, green, blue slider, and these are existing here in the Perform tab, but they're not doing anything, and that's because they're just not hooked up to anything. So that's the next step. We're going to get this actually hooked up in the IO tab. So the next place we need to go is back to IO, and we need to jump into our custom color macro. And you'll notice here that with our constant color, we have 4 inputs that we haven't talked about yet. And if you hover over them, you'll see that you have 1 for red, 1 for green, 1 for blue. Also have a 4th one for alpha, but we're not going to be using that. So the way inputs and outputs work in the IO tab is you have these purple nodes, which are textures. You have the green ones, which are channels, you know, like a DMX channel or an ArtNet channel or something like that, a single value. And then you also have a third type, which we're not going to really talk about in this video, which is teal, which is going to be your audio. But for the sake of this particular tutorial, we're going to just be working with the green ones. So if you go up here to the Create menu and go to Channel Nodes and Capture, you have some interesting things here. You have a widget capture and channel capture. So what we're after is capturing data from our widgets. Widgets are the name for things that exist in the Perform tab, so we'll just make a widget capture and we'll just drop this down. Now this one has a nice little squiggly line, which means that this is not a timed node, it's a streamed node, right? It's getting a constant stream of data from another source. So when you create this, it's just a black square, and over here in the parameters, you'll notice that we have an auto learn button. And so the way to use this is really quite simple. You just prime the auto learn by turning it on. You go back to the Perform tab, and you just move a slider. You hop back over here, you'll notice that that widget capture is now updated to reflect the graphic element of the slider, and if you middle mouse drag, you can actually do a very rough and tumble testing of that slider. This is not the way that you should be controlling these, obviously, but this is just for a very quick test if you want to test something. But once you have this thing linked up and you see the preview, just drag the connector straight into the 0_red. And we're going to duplicate this, and we're going to do this a few more times. So we have a red, a green, and a blue, and let's just name these for consistency. So we'll call this widget capture red. And this will be widget capture V green and widget capture blue. And so we'll go ahead and hook these up, but they are still referencing the red slider. So we need to turn on the auto learn, perform, move the green slider, and then over here we'll do the same thing for the blue. Turn on auto learn and move the blue slider, and there you have it. We've got red, green, blue control only within that macro. So if you go back to macro blue purple, which is a very, very consistent, repeatable color preset, and all of these work exactly as you'd expect, but as soon as we go to our custom color, we now have this really cool slider-based control. So that's looking good, and it's working as we'd expect it to. So there we have it. We've set up a new custom macro that's got some widget inputs, and that's feeding a constant color, and that's going out to our projector. Okay, so we're just about done with making macros, but we're going to do a couple more, and we're going to make these our effect macros. This is kind of a crucial thing that I think just about every VJ interface has, is your effects. Maybe that's a strobe. We're going to use strobes as what we're talking about here because that's a very simple and understandable and common thing. And those strobes are going to just exist up here, maybe above the preview. So going back over here to the IO tab, we're going to duplicate one of these color macros. Doesn't really matter, we're just using it as a starting point. So Control D, move this over here and start ourselves a new column, and we'll call this Macro Strobe 1. And we're actually going to disconnect this output, and we're going to go to the editor. We'll turn on our projectors, and let's grab our projector color. That's the one, the further one back. We'll duplicate this, move it back a little bit more, and we'll call this Projector FX. So there you go. This is moving a little bit back, and it's giving us another projector. We'll actually set this to layer 3, and we'll set this to add. Maybe we'll play around with that later, maybe we won't, but let's just set it to an add for now. And so this is basically on top of the other two projectors, both in terms of their layer stack here, their visual layer stack, but also in terms of their actual functional processing stack. So this projector has got nothing plugged into it, but we want to go ahead and get some stuff going for that one. So going back to the IO tab, we'll take our Macro Strobe 1, let's go inside of it, and let's take ramp 1 and delete that. So we'll bring a new node into the game here that we haven't talked about too much. So if you go to Texture Nodes, Generative, and MultiStrobe, MultiStrobe is a nifty little texture that will basically just output some strobe patterns that are BPM synced. So if you click the play button for your macro, whatever timing you have going on for your macro is going to control that MultiStrobe texture. So going back up real quick, let's just take our MultiStrobe and let's set this from the unit of seconds to beats. This is going to be really important. Let's set it to 1 beat, I guess. Let's go ahead and do 4. So this will be like the lead up, the first one, the slower one. So we'll go back into Macro Strobe. Let's go and connect this to our texture output. And let's go ahead and hit play. Make sure it's playing. And let's go and use a cool feature that exists in the IO tab, which is called the Viewport Underlay. So if you go to the Graph menu in the Viewport here in the Graph and click on Viewport Underlay, you can also use Shift-U. It's going to give you kind of a preview of what's going on in your editor. So I'm going to turn off these projectors, and let's just kind of center up our view on this little fixture again. And let's go up and make sure our macro is actually connected to our effects slot. And as you can see, every time that strobe hits, it goes on to our fixture. So we're going to go ahead and cancel our other macros here, which we could do it from the Perform tab, but you can also just stop them here. And we're going to just look at this effect macro and just really polish it and get it working right. So with this selected, it's currently using the BPM, but it's doing it every 4 beats, so basically every bar. So if you click on MultiStrobe, let's go ahead and dock through some of the settings here and kind of go through it. So we have enable, which is something you can hook up. There is an enable, a phase at the top and enable at the bottom. So you can actually plug in some sliders if you want to have like a speed slider for your strobe. But just know that you can also just have this be kind of a constant in your macro. So that's what we're going to do for this video tutorial. We're not going to use those inputs, but they exist if you need them. Moving on down, we have strobe direction. So this actually gives you different effects for your strobe. And now I actually need to set this to 512, 512. Make sure it is looking good. So we have a random tile pattern, which is kind of cool. We have a seed value, so you can change this up if it's not looking quite right. We have a left to right, a right to left, top to bottom, bottom to top. We also have a circular one. And in addition to these different directions, I guess you could call them, you also have a bias slider here, which will make them a little bit more pulsy or a little bit softer. And you also have a gamma, right? So that's just kind of like an image adjustment on top of bias. We're going to leave those as default. Feel free to play around with those settings if you want. But we're going to leave that all as default, and we're just going to pick, let's see here. In to out, we'll use this for the first one. That looks pretty good. And we'll duplicate this. It's rename Macro Strobe 2, and that's good. let's stop the first one and let's kind of take the second one and let's step it up a notch. Let's make it a little bit faster. We can do that by simply setting the macro to a length of 2. So it's going to double time that. And maybe we also want to have a different type of pattern here. Maybe we want to do something that's like a left to right sweep, but maybe we want some symmetry, so we can actually pull another node in here called TileCropRepeat. And we'll plug this into here and plug that into there. And we'll just need to reflect on X. And so that's going to give us kind of a nice split down the middle with some symmetry. Our resolution changed a little bit because we're mirroring it. So let's go ahead and change that by setting the divisions to 4 and 4. So that's looking pretty cool. Maybe we want to tweak the gamma a little bit, maybe the bias. Maybe that's looking pretty good. And so maybe for the last strobe, we'll have this one happen on every beat. Let's go ahead and play this. And maybe for this one, we'll just have it get a little bit more chaotic. And we'll use the random strobe. This is looking good. Use default settings otherwise. Set this back to 8 and 8. And there we go. We have a low, medium, slow, medium, fast strobe preset. All right, so with that done, we need to make one more group and kind of squish this all into one layout. So let's go ahead and edit this a little bit. Let's move our sliders down, move our previs down like that. And let's duplicate this group. Let's put it over here. And we'll just kind of squish this up, and we'll call this strobes. And we'll duplicate. We're going to have to fix a couple of macros here. That's looking good. We'll duplicate this one over here, and we'll just assign these strobes. So we got strobe 1, strobe 2, and strobe 3. So if we go ahead and go through these, you'll see that we are, in fact, stepping through these. We have the slow, the medium, which honestly it kind of feels a little bit slow to me, and we have the fast one. So we're going to tweak strobe 2 and make that just a bit faster. Maybe we can get away with just speeding this up times 2. Digging that. I think that'll work. And there we go. Slow, medium, fast. So that gives us kind of something to overlay on top of everything else we have going on. So if we kind of trigger some stuff here and we have that strobe going on top, it will basically be an add modifier on top. So I think we can also try something else here. If we take this effects projector and set this to over, we have whatever we have going on underneath, but as soon as we trigger that, it's going to pretty much take over. And that's pretty cool. We can also make these fade times a little bit more aggressive. Let's just do 0, 0, 0. Actually, let's go ahead and make the fade off 0.1, just see what happens. So all right, now we step through those and we get kind of a good hard cut. It might be more interesting for drops and buildups and stuff like that. And then, of course, once we're done with that strobe, we just click the X and we're back to our base content. And while you're strobing, you can also set up your next set of content, kill the strobes, and you're back to this. So good stuff. This is actually feeling pretty good, and it's got just about everything we need. The last thing that we're going to add to this is the BPM widget, and that's going to give us some control of the tempo, and we can use that however we'd like. So all right, we go to edit mode once more, go to system widgets, and click on the BPM system widget, and we can just put this really anywhere. It's not affected by groups, so it doesn't really matter where it goes. We'll go ahead and jump back to perform mode now, and we've got this nice little BPM panel here, and we have a tap, which if we tap this after a few taps, it's going to give us our new BPM. So that's one way you can key it in, and you can of course map all this stuff to a MIDI controller, which we're going to talk about last here in just a moment. But you can also use the buttons here to nudge the value. You can also use the left mouse to drag this value here left and right. And you can middle mouse drag for a little bit more of a speedy, larger scale offset here. So there's lots of ways to set it. So you can tap, nudge, tap, slide, whatever you got to do. Anything that you can mouse over that's orange, by the way, is mappable. So that means you can map that to a MIDI controller. You can map an ArtNet device, channels coming out of another software or console. You can map that to these things as well. And you can do all of that. We'll talk about those in kind of a dedicated video. But for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to show you, at least through what you can see here in the software, what the process of mapping an APC40 Mark II, some of the UI sliders from that, to the actual buttons here. So really quickly, let me just pull up a Chrome tab and show you what I'm actually working with here, APC40 Mark II. And this is a very popular MIDI controller for VJing because it's got a left-right crossfader, which is something that we'll talk about in another video. There's a way to use that here in GeoPix as well, but we actually don't need that for this setup, which is kind of cool. So you can actually use a Novation Launchpad as well. But the cool thing about this controller is, the buttons have LED feedback, which is a thing that's supported and built into GeoPix. Same with the Novation Launchpad. Those are the only two that I've personally tested, but if other MIDI controllers kind of follow the same scheme, they should work similarly. So something to try. I'm going to be using some of these buttons up here, and for the sliders, I'll be using some of these. Now you could also use these knobs that have the LED feedback, which also works, but we're not worried about that so much with a physical slider because we can kind of feel and see where it is. Okay, and we'll probably rig up a few more buttons over here somewhere. We'll just pick some, and that will be our tap tempo button. So that'll be helpful as well. So diving right into that, the way this kind of goes, you go to File, Preferences, and we go to Channel In. And this is where you pull in information from a MIDI controller, from an OSC device. Maybe it's Touch OSC. Maybe you have an ArtNet or a streaming ACN device sending out channel data. This is where all of that stuff lives. Basically, you have 8 banks, so you can have 8 separate devices they're all different, connected to your computer. For us, we just need one, and it needs to be MIDI. So we'll go ahead and turn this on, and you'll see that we have a message that pops up here that tells us exactly what we have connected to our computer. I also have my audio interface. We're not going to pay attention to that, but if we just click Initialize once more, it's going to fully refresh this list, and what we see here is the APC40 Mark II is showing up. This means that Windows sees it as a device, and that it's been properly installed by the operating system, which is a thing you need to make sure happens outside of GeoPix. But once that's good, if you click Initialize and you see it show up, just choose it from the dropdown. So we're going to choose APC40 Mark II, and once we've chosen that, we'll initialize once again just to be extra sure that we've initialized the controller, with the proper messages. And once that's done, clear channels if you have anything, and just hit some buttons on your controller, and you should see them show up here in the message log. So if we see that, we're good to go. We're actually ready to start mapping. So going to basically start by setting up 3 buttons to cycle through these. So if you right click on one of these, to drive a button, you'll want to do a drive exact value, and we'll just kind of hit a button on the MIDI controller twice to learn it, and we'll just kind of move down the line here. And I actually need to redo this one. Looks like I actually learned the same thing twice to the same button. So I'm going to go ahead and reset this and try it once more. Drive exact, button 1, drive exact, button 2, and drive exact, button 3. So now we have 3 buttons that will cycle through these 3 shapes. Now we could also map a button to do the group eject, but we're not going to really worry about that for now. Just know that that's available. Then over here, I'm going to use the opposite side of the APC40, and I'm going to do the same thing over here. And I'll just basically learn each of these. And that's looking pretty good. And then we'll go ahead and learn this one, keyframe, exact value, to another button as well. So you can see we're triggering all this stuff, and once we're here, we want these sliders to do stuff, but we don't have these mapped yet. By the way, cool thing about these sliders is if you left click and drag in the kind of background area, you can do a quick and easy set to max or set to minimum function. If you do a middle mouse drag, it'll actually do the same thing, but it will do it smoothly. So this is quite nice if you want to quickly min or max a slider, and if you do it slowly, it's going to do it very slowly, and if you do it fast, it's going to do it pretty fast. So that's a nice feature. That's very quick once you get used to using it with the mouse. It's the advantage of having kind of a lot of space here, and this of course all works with a touchscreen as well. Okay, so mapping these sliders is just as easy, except we're going to use the normalized option for a slider because a slider on a MIDI controller outputs 0 to 127. So we'll go ahead and map this to slider 1. We'll map this to slider 2, and we'll map this to slider 3. So now we have 3 sliders doing their thing and gives us full color control with hardware. So that's looking good. We also need to, of course, map our strobes. So let's go ahead and map these as well. Whoops, almost knocked that off the table. But I didn't, so that's good. All right, so we got these 3 mapped to buttons at the top here of my MIDI controller, and that's great. The last thing that we want to do is hook up our tap tempo, this one right here. So we're going to hook this up to yet another button, and we'll drive with exact value. And now we have a button on our MIDI controller that we can use to tap in the tempo anytime we want. So this is quite nice. With that said, that's pretty much the end, right? We've got this thing set up. We have our shapes bank, we have our color sliders, and we also have our fancy custom slider bank here that we can use to do custom colors, really dial it in. If we wanted to, we could have another group here that was going to be specifically for maybe artist logos or artist graphics, right? If an artist hands you on the day of a show a thumb drive and they have some stuff on there they want to see up on the screen, you don't have to alter all of your content, right? You just basically make a new macro bank connected to a new projector that's basically overlaid on top of your entire system, and you can plug it right in very, very fast. So, okay, that's pretty much it for this video. I think we've covered a lot of ground, plenty for one video. I hope this was helpful. If you find GeoPix interesting and it's helping you out in your own stuff, I have a Patreon, so feel free to go check that out and support the project. But either way, I appreciate you watching, and please stick around for the next one. And if you have any feedback or questions, please check out the Discord. We have lots of cool stuff going on there. And please post examples of your work. I'd love to see it. All right, thanks a lot, and stay tuned for the next one.